morning, you're watching Business World Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day, Monday. With just a few days left before the 18th Congress adjourns, NEDA urges the Senate to ratify RCEP.
The National Telecommunications Commission expects the entry of more foreign satellite providers in the country following the registration approval of SpaceX subsidiary Starlink.
More than 500,000 foreign tourists have arrived in the Philippines since the borders reopened in February. And with the further easing of entry requirements, the Tourism Department looks forward to an uptick in arrivals in the coming weeks.
And the local bourse is seen to move upwards this week. That's as the incoming Marcos Jr. administration has begun revealing its economic team and fiscal policy direction. We begin our broadcast with NEDA Chief Carl Chua joining calls for the Senate ratification of the RCEP.
That's as the fate of the mega-trade deal remains uncertain at the chamber. Chua says he hopes the Senate to urgently ratify the RCEP this week. A regular session of the 18th Congress adjourns on Friday, June 3rd, and outgoing Senate President Tito Soto has already raised doubts that the RCEP will be approved this week. Soto believes the RCEP, which was signed by ASEAN countries along with trade partners China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, needs further interpolation. For the NEDA, the agriculture sector can further improve if efforts are undertaken to fix structural issues and if the country joins the RCEP. Last week, officials from NEDA, the DTI, and the DA met with the Samahang Industriya ng Agrikultura to listen to the group's concerns about the deal. The DTI has earlier said that trade liberalization in the agriculture sector is very limited in the RCEP.
President-elect Bongbong Marcos has earlier expressed reservations on the ratification of the trade deal. Marcos Jr. says the agriculture sector should become more competitive before the RCEP gets ratified. Senator Francis Tolentino, an ally of Marcos Jr., backs Marcos Jr.'s stance. He says the incoming administration should be given a chance to review the deal. And the National Telecommunications Commission is expecting more foreign satellite broadband providers to enter the country following its approval of Starlink's registration. Starlink is a subsidiary of Elon Musk's SpaceX, and Starlink Internet Services Philippines received its certification of registration as a value-added service provider on May 26. That's in line with the amendments to the Public Service Act. This measure now allows full foreign ownership in businesses in key sectors, including telecommunications. Starlink's registration allows it to directly access satellite systems and to build and operate broadband facilities to offer internet services in the country. The registration is valid until April of 2023.
House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Joey Salceda reiterates his call to privatize NAIA. That's to raise government revenues and decongest Metro Manila. Salceda adds that decommissioning the airport for redevelopment will allow the government to open new north, south, and east-west connections in NCR. But Salceda says the NAIA redevelopment should be complemented with the completion of the north-south commuter rail project. This is air traffic will have to be diverted to the airports in Clark and Bulacan. Salceda also urges the completion of the Bicol Express or the PNR South Long Haul project, as it would allow people from Quezon and Camarines Norte to use the Bicol International Airport. Recall that the incoming Marcos administration has expressed willingness to continue the Duterte government's Build, Build, Build program. Now, seasoned managers make up Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s economic team to the delight of some members of the business community, including the group of our guests this morning. We have on the show Coco Alcuaz, Executive Director of the Makati Business Club. Good morning, Coco. Thank you for joining us today.
Morning, Jester. Morning, Danny.
All right, so again, almost all seats in the economic team occupied, save for the budget department. How is the business community viewing this roster of Marcos Jr.?
Well, as you know, the first 2 weeks after the president-elect was elected, there were some jitters that no names were coming out, and there were all these reports from so-called credible sources about who was being considered. And we had to remind others and sometimes ourselves that it was not critical yet that he needed to announce names within the first 2 weeks. And in fact, last week, as you mentioned, we got a slew of announcements. Almost all of the top economic team had been named. And we, as well as other business groups, all welcomed these appointments of experienced and well-known people, which is very important at this time, Justin.
Okay, we're talking also about names that have served in previous administrations from way back, even during the Estrada administration. Does that, to you, at least signal policy continuity? And at the same time, how does that boost the confidence here of the private sector?
A couple of things. No? One reason why these appointments were welcome is because they were experienced and well-known. We know where they're coming from. We know the policies that they have espoused in the past. It tends to be very much pro-competitiveness and also pro-inclusivity. And those are the kinds of policies that we think are very important to create the jobs that we need, which is really job number one. And if you'll allow me, Jester, just to talk about how important this all is right now. More than previously, it's really essential now that the private sector and the government work together to create these jobs. You know how, and your viewers know how weakened the economy has been after COVID, how our finances have been depleted, how commodities are rising, inflation is rising, and borrowing getting more expensive. This government that's coming in doesn't have the runway that the current government and some previous governments had, which had a great global environment to function in, and also a lot of money in the bank. This government could use the help, and the private sector is very willing to help, of course, could use the help of the private sector to invest in order to create those jobs. We're very glad, for example, when incoming NEDA Secretary Arsenio Balisacan last week said he was looking forward to reviving PPPs, or public-private partnerships. As your audience knows, this is a project where the private sector rather, puts up the money and takes on some of the risks so that the government can use its money on other important matters.
Coco, you already mentioned the incoming economic team is inheriting unprecedented amount of problems, elevated inflation, and of course, twin deficits here. And the government needs to fund this possibly at the expense of businesses or taxpayers. Tell us, in the short term, what needs to be done to get us back on our feet? What specific steps need to be taken? At least let's go for the first 100 days of the new incoming economic team.
We're in no position to make prescriptions. The government has the wide view on that, both the outgoing and obviously the incoming government. But since you're asking, I'll just mention 3, 4, or 5 items that we think could be really helpful in the first, shall we say, 100 days, as you said. First of all, we would recommend reviewing recently revised BOT rules. I'm not sure if your network has covered this, but in the last couple of months, the government has revised those BOT rules, and many in the business sector, in fact, have spoken about this in terms of how these have made BOTs, build, operate, transfer projects where the private sector comes in, maybe much more risky than they need to be and that they can be in order for the private sector to come in. So low-hanging fruit, it's newly revised regulations. Perhaps we could review those, suspend them, amend them, or even go back to or improve the previous one. That's number one. Related to that, accelerate the rules and the rollout of the recently passed PSA amendments, the Foreign Investments Act, Retail Trade Liberalization Act, all legislation that we need to thank the current government for, and that we're really looking forward to this government, the new government, implementing quickly. That will bring in the investment that we need to create jobs. Very particularly, Danny, Jester, you also have been reporting about the BPOs and remote work. We would really recommend reviewing the law on BPO incentives in relation to remote work. Remote work saved that industry during the last 2 years, and a lot of the workers there have gotten used to that, and it's working for them. we want to make sure that this huge sector remains competitive worldwide. Two more things, if you give me a little bit of time. We're very passionate about e-receipts. The current DOF has done its work on that. It's between them and the BIR now. If we have e-receipts, everybody can transact better, especially small and medium enterprises. And then on the consumer side, it's much easier for them to transact as well. And that will really generate a lot of economic activity, especially in the MSME sector. One final one, and you mentioned the Joey Salceda in your previous story. He has a bill called the Ease of Paying Taxes Bill, which will make it easier, especially for MSMEs, to file their taxes, pay their taxes. And we think that's it'll be a great catalyst for growth and for entrepreneurship if that's passed. One simple example. Right now, if you're a business, big or small, you have to go to a specific RDO to pay your tax. This bill, one of the many things this bill will do is you can go to anyone and it's much easier for you to pay them online anyway. That we think is a great catalyst for economic growth.
All right, quite a number of specific items there that I think the economic managers should at least
feasible as well.
Yeah, exactly. Things that they can at least look into. But let's zoom out a bit here, Coco. And you see, a major issue here that the economic team has to handle has, of course, settling our pandemic-induced debt. And on that note, you have the current finance department already recommending a consolidated financial plan. Your thoughts on that? Is it high time for us to raise or expand our taxes? You have, on the other hand, incoming DOF Secretary Jokno saying that he would at least first seek the assurance from both houses of Congress before pushing forward with this plan.
I think we all saw those slides. There were 4 or 5 slides, lots of proposals there. I can't claim that we've studied each and every one of those. We all know that we need to raise money to pay for that debt, and some of these choices will have to be made. Danny, I can't now say which of those we would be supportive of or not. We know that it's a lot of discussion. What we look forward to is a lot more talk between the government and the private sector about policies such as these in order that we get the changes necessary in time. The current administration passed 2 tax reform bills over 6 years. The first one passed in a year, the second one took almost 3 years to pass. We hope that if we talk more with each other, that these adjustments that need to be made will happen faster because we will all be invested in them from the beginning.
Coco, in lieu of that, related to that, are the hardest hit sectors in the business community still pushing for more stimulus at this point? Or can we use that stimulus in other means? Of course, we need to pay back our debts, and of course, there's other projects that need to be continued, as mentioned, build, and even just strengthening our employment. Can we still afford more stimulus to the private sector?
Danny, I understand you've taught economics, and Jester, you've covered this a lot. So I think you know that in terms of stimulus, our government gave relatively little compared to many other governments around the world. I'm not sure right now that anyone is still asking with a loud voice for stimulus because there was so little to begin with. It would be welcome, of course. We look forward to hearing signals from the new government about that. And it won't necessarily be pandemic stimulus anymore. I guess if you call it new normal stimulus, which you would probably characterize as just economic policy. In any economic policy, there's going to be a tax and a spending side of it. And I think that's where we're going to be. I'm not sure it still needs to be characterized as a COVID stimulus program.
All right,
okay, very interesting points.
Definitely, I mean, economic team more or less formed here. We're just going to be on wait and see mode as to what policies exactly are they going to put in place there. Thank you very much for your insights this morning. Coco Alquaz, Executive Director over at the Makati Business Club.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you.
The Bangko Sentral has ordered financial institutions under its supervision to remove all e-sabong operators from the list of merchants in their online apps. This follows President Duterte's directive to suspend all e-sabong operations in the country starting May 3rd. Clients who have remaining funds in their e-sabong accounts are urged to transfer the funds back to their e-wallets on or before June 27 or 30 days after the memorandum was issued. After 30 days, BSP-supervised financial entities are directed to disable the link between e-sabong accounts and e-money wallets, including e-sabong merchant operator accounts.
The Board of Investments says the Philippines is counting on the world's shift to green technology to boost investments in the country. Trade Undersecretary and BOI head Perry Rodolfo says the Philippines is blessed with minerals that are crucial to the shift towards a more digitalized and greener world. This with copper, nickel, and cobalt being necessarily minerals for batteries used to power data centers and electric vehicles. Rodolfo added that the end of a ban on new mining permits also positions the sector to attract funds for a shift towards processing instead of simply exporting ores. The official noted that the key thing is to make sure that minerals mined in the Philippines are processed here and are given additional value prior to exporting them.
Now, one labor group cries foul over the Finance Department's proposal to impose higher taxes, saying it will place a heavy burden on ordinary workers. Camille Samonte with the report.
Labor Group Kilusang Mayo Uno denounces the recommendation imposing new and higher taxes to pay the country's ballooning debts. KMU Secretary General Jerome Adonis says this will only burden workers and Filipinos.
Hindi talaga namin tatanggapin yung dagdag na buwis dahil hirap na nga ang mga manggagawa na di pa nga namin nakukuha yung dagdag na sweldo na matagal namin ipinaglaban, kakarampot na nga, wala na, kinain na kagad nung bagong inflation rate. Tapos ngayon may panibago pang planong buwis.
Adonis said that the taxes collected by the government are only being used for corruption. This as he notes that government services during the pandemic were not felt by the public.
Maraming nagutom natin mga kababayan. Ang nakakalungkot at ang nakakainis at nakakagalit dito, nangutang sila ng nangutang tapos yung taong bayan yung magbabayad. Asa naman ang justice doon? Hindi, unfair yun.
But if higher taxes are imposed, the group calls on Filipinos to be vigilant in monitoring where their taxes are going. Adonis also warns that this may lead to protests. With this, KMU hopes for change under the presidency of Bongbong Marcos Jr. Adonis said the Marcos administration must finally lay out their plans to the public.
Dapat makita talaga ng taong bayan yan kasi yun yung sukatan eh. Doon natin makikita anong gagawin mo sa loob ng isang taon at yung 6 years. Makikita na natin kung saan ang direksyon ng ating bansa.
For News 5, Camille Samonte, We Are One News.
Pausing for a quick break, but coming right up after that, we'll check how our local bourse is moving this morning as analysts expect the index to move upward this week.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
And you're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
All right, Dan, it seems to be a growing consensus. The new economic team is seasoned, strong, and will bring investor confidence nowhere but up for today.
Well, hopefully, Jess, investors or analysts also are seeing shares to move upwards this week. We did close in the red last week, but that was after some days of a positive reception on that clear, let's say, continuity path of President-elect BBM. But still waiting, of course, for more details in terms of transition. That's according to RCBC's Mike Ricafort. Nevertheless, another good thing happening, regional stocks set to open with an upswing. This after the U.S. equities last week. They had their best week last week since 2020 of November. So that's a big deal also spilling over into us. And you can see a couple of sectors here shining. Mining and oil up by 1 7/10%. We were reporting earlier about that nickel, possible resource there in terms of digitalization. Properties as well up by 1 3/10%. Now let's look at, the quick picture here. Another interesting part to be watching out for here, according to COL Financial, is the financial or banking sector, which is also in the green this morning. This, of course, as the incoming BSP Governor Felipe Medalla did signal a possible rate increase in June. Yet again, he says that he's on the same page as Governor Diokno. And this, according to Call Financial, stock investors should consider putting their money into banks and, because interest rates might generally benefit the sector and might support the net interest margin expansion. Now, another thing to be watching out for is MREIT and the property sector, also, of course, directly impacted by those rising interest rates. This as MREIT is saying that they are already considering properties from townships in key growth areas outside of Metro Manila to infuse into the REIT. They will be looking at diversifying their portfolio. And you can see that performing up by 6 centavos to 16 pesos and 88. And finally, Jess, on that news report on Starlink, one stock specifically to be watching out for here, and that is Converge. Take a look at that, up by 6 5/10% since the past 3 days. Of course, they did sign a deal with SpaceX to lease infrastructure. So another one to be watching out for there. And sorry, one last, Jess, the peso. I just wanted to point out that this has been strengthening on the back of the continuity plan possibly, but also on the back, of course, on the rising interest rates. And they are saying, at least this from Bloomberg, the peso may start to appreciate versus the dollar this week, easing safe haven demand due to the rate hikes of other global central banks. The peso trading at 52.235 to the greenback.
The Tourism Department reports that foreign arrivals since the country reopened its borders has reached 517,000. That's as of May 25. The agency said the U.S. remains to be the top source of arrivals, followed by South Korea and Canada. The DOT expects the arrival of more foreign tourists following the further easing of entry requirements. Starting today, fully vaccinated and boosted inbound foreign visitors will no longer be required to have a pre-departure test for COVID-19. However, the agency noted that arriving passengers are still encouraged to obtain travel insurance.
And the BSP has made it easier for international travelers to exchange foreign currencies. This as the central bank approved further amendments to Forex regulations. The changes allow travelers to accomplish new currencies declaration forms or CDFs online. The regulator says the new CDF consolidates the data requirements of the Customs Bureau, the Anti-Money Laundering Council, and the Bangko Sentral.
And that's a first look into the business day this Monday, May 30, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.